Happy Monday, Matt. How's it
Happy
going?
Monday, Joe. How's it going?
I am very jet lagged right now. But yeah, and look who just showed up here. Kai Zenner. What's up, man? How are you?
Hi.
Hey,
Sorry
cool.
for
We
the
just
delay.
we're actually we just went live right now, so good timing on joining us. So
We're doing audio check live on the air, but you're coming through loud and clear, so there seems to
yeah,
be no
Perfect.
issue. Yeah.
yeah,
Sounds
good to
good.
see you. Awesome. So yeah, this is Kai Zenner. For people who don't know you who are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. First of all, sorry for the delay. We are right now on the last meters of our political negotiations on the AI Act. So I'm Kai Zenner, working in the European Parliament and heavily involved for many years now in AI policy making here in the European Union.
Nice. This is a very timely discussion in the US as well. The Biden administration recently announced some moves on AI, and have you been following those pretty closely? What's going on in the US?
Yes, I did, even though I didn't have time to check every detail. But
Yeah.
yeah, of course. And I need to say, many people here in Brussels are a little bit disappointed because they wanted to be the first ones leading the discourse until the end. And of course, now the United States made a big proposal. And I need to say there are a lot of good ideas in it.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, I guess so. For people who don't know what the EU AI Act is, maybe can you give a brief description of it?
Yeah, sure. So the European Union, first of all, did not invent everything new. So the AI Act of the EU is heavily based on international concepts like human oversight, transparency, non-discrimination, and so on and so on, that have been discussed now for many, many years in the OECD, United Nations, and so on. The European Union took those concepts together and put them in, for Europe, typical product safety legislation piece, which is kind of telling companies how to design their products, their services, what minimum criteria those products need to fulfill, and so on and so on. And they merged it with a risk-based approach, meaning that we have 4 layers within a risk pyramid. The first layer are prohibitions, so AI systems that from now on would be prohibited in the European Union. Then we have a second layer that are high-risk AI systems that need to fulfill additional obligations. So as I said, for example, human oversight. And then a third layer, which needs to fulfill certain transparency obligations. It's especially systems that are, for example, allowing the creation of deep fakes or chatbots that are directly interacting with a human being. And the fourth layer, which are non-risky AI systems and that do not need to fulfill any additional points. And yeah, together with this approach, the European Union was hoping that we are tackling the risk of artificial intelligence, but at the same time, not hampering innovation in AI. Even though, maybe as a short assessment, my boss and I, we are not super happy because really the strong focus of the AI Act is really on risks, and it's not so much in it about how to promote innovation and how to help SMEs and startups in this field.
Interesting. I want to bring up another issue here, which is how do we make regulation, let's call it dynamic or agile to borrow business terminology? How do we make it so that instead of just passing a bill and then sitting on it for 10 years while the world changes, we can actually respond to new things happening in the field? Because that's my worry with any type of regulation. Like if we just sit there, a lot of stuff changes, the regulation really falls behind and doesn't support innovation, like you were saying, Kai. Obviously, that's a huge problem, and it lets other countries and regions overtake you, and it potentially ignores new risks that we weren't thinking about when the legislation was drafted.
Yeah, it's a good point. And this actually is the European Union tried also to tackle in the AI Act by introducing, let's say, mechanisms that are not normal in EU legislation, but in particular makes the law more dynamic and more adjustable. So it's now becoming very European law unique, but we have something called delegated acts, implementing acts, which is not demanding or requiring the both co-legislators, so the European Parliament and the member states, to interact, to double check everything and so on. But the Commission per se can already make, for example, an adjustment by adding a new high-risk AI category that currently we never thought about or is not there yet, but maybe in 1.5 years is out there, is posing huge risks. And then again, the Commission could use a delegated act to update everything in, let's say, maybe 6 months or something like this. Faster, at least here in Europe, the legislator is not really able to do. Then it would be more the enforcement level. So enforcement bodies that could maybe, based on rather broad enforcement articles in the AI Act, could become active and could jump in if there is something super risky. And maybe a second point that we try to do here in the European Union to really tackle this dynamic field of AI is that we made everything rather principle-based, based on general principles. I talked already at the very beginning of those internationally agreed principles like transparency and so on. And in the EU AI Act, those principles, even though they are applicable to all the sectors and all different AI systems, they are rather general, and therefore, together with harmonized standards and with guidelines that are further specifying them, they are leaving a lot of room to further adjustments, to, again, also being applicable in, as I said, very different use cases, that if you would create principles or articles that are too specific would not work, basically.
It's really interesting. And actually, there's a comment here from Bart. It says, focus on risk, classic European regulation. So what's the, I guess, my question is, how is risk identified right now? Like, what is risky? What's sort of risky? What's not risky at all? Like, are these newly defined, or is this, how is this evaluated?
Yeah, good question. The European Commission, so the body here in the European Union who is drafting the laws, is always doing an impact assessment and let's say a public consultation before those new legislative proposals that they are making. And back then, I think in total they did it for 2 years or 3 years, if you are really counting the whole period in. And based on all their talks, they came up with a list of 6 prohibitions. So as I said, in the first layer of the risk pyramid, 6 AI technologies like social scoring, remote biometrical identification, and so on, where they were saying, this is not really in line with European values, with our democratic system, and so on and so on. Then on high-risk AI systems, they made it in a similar approach, or with a similar approach. They first, based on their talks, they identified areas like critical infrastructure, like education, like employment. And then in those sectors, they went through certain contexts of use, deployment cases, and so on. For example, education, if it's about getting rejected or accepted at a university for a new master degree or something like this. This being said, it was also one of our major points of criticism. We often found that those use cases that they either classified as prohibited or high risk were a little bit too broad and too general. And often, for example, one of the criticism when it comes to social scoring was, yes, social scoring, if you just have the Chinese government case in mind, then very likely is not in line with European values. But also insurances or banks or creditworthiness is some kind of social scoring, and therefore maybe you are prohibiting this kind of technology in the future. And also in the high-risk AI cases, we found a lot of use cases that are already in practice. So, for example, you can find them in commercial users, and also certain things that are currently developed are actually good for society. And yeah, we as Parliament and the member states try to filter those out or make the language more specific. But in the end, my feeling is we were not 100% successful. So there's probably still something in that should not be in. And this is back to the question, probably really going to this original idea to go for this kind of use case where you always has this risk that you are not 100% accurate, and therefore leaving something out or putting something in that shouldn't be in.
Yeah. My concern specifically with social scoring is that we're treating quote unquote AI and social scoring like they're brand new things, but that's really not the case. So, for example, even maybe in 2000, I had the ability to search a resume database and to put in some criteria and say, I'm looking for people with at least 10 years of experience in this particular area. Could even be a SQL query. And even that could be considered a form of social scoring. And so if you just like blanket ban social scoring and put a lot of restrictions on it, you could have a lot of side effects that you weren't expecting, even against things that maybe we didn't consider social scoring, but really were.
Yeah, exactly. No, 100%. That was exactly our main concern. Again, I hope we as co-legislators now did a good job in adding further language, also reducing here and there a little bit the prohibitions. But on top, and this is again typical European Union, after we are adopting our laws, there will be a lot of guidelines and guidance, and all 27 different member states like France, Estonia, Germany, and so on will also establish and bring forward guidelines. And probably in those guidelines, they need to do further work on it. They need to lay out, okay, this AI system now falls under it, this AI system don't, and so on. And actually, now that I'm talking about it, this is actually one of the main tasks from governmental bodies and the European Union to make a kind of use case list where they first of all write down, this is AI, this is not AI, this is high risk, this is not a high risk. Because again, if you are trying to regulate everything out there that falls under this very broad term of AI, which is more than a buzzword right now, then you are facing a lot of problems. And yeah, again, unfortunately, the European Union is often going for this approach with subsequent guidelines and guidance or court cases, which are then clarifying a little bit better what we wanted.
Interesting. I think I can't remember if it was your tweet or somebody else's, but it seemed like there were maybe some kind of last minute grumblings going on right now.
Yes, also that is typical for European policy making. There's always a big drama at the end when you are coming to the final compromises. So what we have right now, we all want to close at the at the end of this year, so shortly before Christmas, because next year there is the European election in June, and here it takes quite a long, even after a political agreement, to finally adopt the law, because lawyer linguists need to get through the translations in 24, 25 different languages need to take place, the voting in the parliament, in the council, and so on and so on. So we have a rather hard deadline shortly before December, or if anything goes wrong, we have a little bit longer until the first week of February. Then we need to be done. Otherwise, everything will be postponed to after the election. And because then there are also a lot of reappointments and so on, probably there will not be an AI Act before Easter 2025. So we would lose a lot of time. On the other hand, as you just said, there are a lot of points currently on the table that we, so the parliamentarians and the member states, cannot agree on at all. The first one and the second one we spoke already a little bit about, which are prohibitions and high-risk AI use cases. And we talked already about the problems there, because making it specific enough that you capture what you want to capture, but not making it too broad that you create certain loopholes, especially when it comes to prohibitions. A third point that we are currently fighting against each other is governance and enforcement. Here in Brussels, also in the parliament, there is this tendency to harmonize everything a little bit more, so centralize it, like in the United States, bringing more to Washington, here to Brussels. But of course, member states, like the states in the United States, do not always like this very much. And the fourth and final point is generative AI. Generative AI, and Matt was kind of already mentioned something like this happening. It was not on the agenda of the AI Act at the beginning when the law was drafted. So it was one of the examples where technology were kind of overtaking lawmaking. And because of the potential importance of generative AI, foundation model, general purpose AI systems, we in Brussels thought that it would be wise to at least put certain, let's say, minimum criteria for developer of foundation model in the law, and even more a kind of obligation to share information from upstream in the value chain to downstream. But how those obligations should exactly look like, and how do you determine who is falling under what kind of obligations, this is at the moment heavily disputed. And yeah, let's see, we have a few weeks left until Christmas, so I don't know for sure at the moment if we are managing or not.
So here's a question. Does the law say anything about copyright? And so I think this is a big debate right now going on really worldwide. And there's a side that argues that training models on books and media that you legally have access to is very similar to humans reading or accessing that material. And therefore, it should be considered fair use to do that training. And then there's another side. We've seen lawsuits over this in the United States, unresolved so far, that argues that that is copyright violation, that if you train a model on a book by Sarah Silverman, for example, you're violating her copyright on her book. Does the law say anything about that? Because I think even in the United States, either we have to have legislation on this or the courts have to clarify it or something. It's just kind of the Wild West right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. And also this belongs to the last points of contention or stumbling points on our road to find an agreement. So in the AI Act, it's currently part of foundation models article or generative AI article. And currently what is on the table is, I don't know if you saw it, is an obligation for companies like OpenAI to provide a sufficient detailed summary of all copyright protected content that they used, for example, for the training, but then also to introduce some mechanism when it's about output that those models or systems like ChatGPT are creating. Similar to how you said it, also here in Brussels, it's highly disputed. There are basically kind of 50%, 50% division of people who are arguing for one side or the other side. If you ask me what I think will be there in the end, probably not a detailed, sufficient summary, but I guess we will add there at least an option for a right holder to request additional information by a company like OpenAI in order to allow this right holder to find out, first of all, what kind of his or her protected content has been used, and then if something was used, to maybe engage in a direct dialogue with this company like OpenAI in order to get maybe a certain refund or a certain redress or whatsoever. But how this exactly will work is completely unclear. At the moment, it's just this one-liner that a company like OpenAI needs to provide a sufficient detailed summary.
Wow, I'm just thinking through the implementation details of this from a technical level.
Yes.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. If you thought the GDPR deletion requests were tricky,
Yeah.
yeah.
Unfortunately, those things currently, because of this time pressure that we are talking so much about it, we are not spending enough time in those details, in those technical details, as you underlined, because there's just such a big rush to get everything closed and done deal, that I would say really reach out to stakeholders, kind of stop now since September, because there is just a lack of time, which I find extremely pity, because this field, as we now all said several times, is changing so much, and there are so much new information every day, basically, that it's not a good state what is happening right now here.
Interesting.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, it's interesting because there, as you were saying, Kai, there's the prohibition aspect and the risk aspect, but I think it's important to remember why the EU was created, which was as a trade union to make the EU more economically competitive initially with respect to coal and steel. And so obviously we need to think in terms of how do you think about AI trade internationally and making your member states competitive worldwide? And in the US, this is a big thing we have to think about as well.
Yeah, totally. And now that you are mentioning it, I really hope that the European Union, after the AI Act is hopefully adopted, is also going back a little bit in reaching out internationally, because this, I would say, we could see a little bit in the last 2 years that, or 3 years even, that especially the higher level of policymakers in the European Union, they were really kind of convinced that we can do everything on our own. And if we are now coming up with the perfect AI legislation, everyone in the world will follow. I was never a big fan of this mindset, let's say. And I think going back to the beginning of our talk, the last weeks, I think showed that other areas of the world or other regions in the world are also advancing, are doing quite a lot. And in the end, let's say, at least for the Western democratic world, I think we can only succeed if we are really working together. No? And if we are now creating here some AI rules in the European Union that do not make any sense for our friends in Canada or in the United States, I don't think they will bring us forward a lot. So my big hope is that, again, after the adoption of the AI Act, the European Union will focus much more again on international cooperation and streamlining different policy approaches.
It's going to be a big one too, because you got to balance the innovation aspect, like you talked about. And we've been talking about a lot of the risks and the regulation part, but I mean, OpenAI had their developer day conference last week, and that was awesome to see. There was a lot going on. So, and things are just moving forward at a very rapid pace. It was interesting too. I was just actually in Europe left on Saturday, and it's every time I'm there, it's just such a stark contrast to there's the EU way of doing stuff, there's the American way of doing stuff, and these are it seems it's just kind of a tale of two worlds in some ways. I think the US moves fast. We do have a tendency to break things a lot more quickly, but that's it's a feature and a bug. But in Europe, things tend to move a lot more slowly. And I think we were talking about this on my podcast too. the notion that I think it was after a talk I gave in Paris, somebody said, the U.S. innovates and the EU regulates. I think was the quote that I heard, right? And so, but hopefully, this fosters a sense of innovation, because when I talk to European companies, they really do genuinely want to innovate and and move faster, right? I don't think there's a company in the land that I met who wants to move slowly and very, um, overly cautiously. So cautiously maybe, but they want to move fast, right? They want to be able to be technically advanced and innovate. So I think that how are these risks going to be balanced against that need for European companies to want to innovate?
Yeah. Well, I think what you said at the beginning is really this kind of different mindset among Europeans and US Americans, and it's always being used. But yeah, the perfect example is just those different level of risk taking. If you're failing one time in the European Union with a startup, you are done. In the United States, you can redo it several times until you are successful. And even though we are hearing this example nonstop, it's true. It's still true. Nevertheless, I think in the European Union, even though I'm often underlining the negative points and so on, one positive development in the last I would say maybe 1-2 years, is that we are having more and more this called digital innovation hubs or ecosystems, especially around universities. It was one of our long-term problems, especially in Germany, actually, that universities were making one thing, and then you had a really, really strict distinction towards economy and business. So university people do not really want to cooperate at all with business people because capitalism is something bad, and so on and so on. This really changed, at least in some parts, for example, in Munich or in Berlin or in Stuttgart, so in the south again of Germany. One example I will now take is the Technical University of Munich. They kind of brought in a lot of US companies, but also EU companies, and they also try to promote startups from their students. And because they are also mixing their teams, so the teams are now hugely or highly international, maybe 1-2 Germans, but otherwise people from all over the world. I think this mindset that I mentioned at the very beginning, that you only can fail one time and then you are out, is therefore not fully there anymore. Also, those teams are speaking English, which allows them to directly go on the European market or even outside Europe on the market. And I think this is something that really helped the European Union in the last 1-2 years. As I said, our biggest problem still is the money, the funding. Compared to VCs in the United States, our companies so far normally do not get a lot of initial investments. And I think there really we need to do something. I don't know how, but yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, what do you suggest? So this is still a very much an open problem, how to bring more VC money into Europe.
Yes, exactly. I think, again, when it comes to the mindset, I think we are on a good path. There are good steps being taken, especially this combination of research and business entrepreneurship. It's really, really good that finally we made a step forward. And maybe as an additional point, well, I don't know how it is in the United States if you are in Montana, in North Dakota, and so on. But in Europe, and especially in Germany, we have some areas where they have really good connectivity, but others not at all. And I think this is also a huge issue that we are still facing in the European Union, that there are areas that are not really connected to, let's say, even the internet. Where my mother is living, she really needs to leave her house to have a phone call because it's just not possible. And she lives very close to a larger town. And until we haven't solved those infrastructure problems in the European Union, I think we also still will face major issues to really become the global lead in a technology like AI.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think you and I met or came across each other's radar at the Applied AI conference in Munich.
Yes.
That was back in late April or early May, and that's a good example. I think I can't remember. Okay, so that's actually, that group is a spinoff, I think, out of Lidl, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that.
Yeah.
And big company, massive company, but I think privately held as well, right? And so that's but that, but this large company is trying to spin off these groups like Applied AI to really foster the next wave of innovation for not only their companies, but maybe some other IP they can sell off. So I think it's an interesting approach because you have a lot of these incubators. Another example, I was just in Helsinki last week, and the company that held the summit that I spoke at, they were spun off from a giant consulting group in the Nordics, Solida, right? So this is a product that's being developed there that they're now trying to they aren't trying, they're selling quite successful with it. But it's an interesting model where you don't really see that as much in the States, because as you point out, VC funding is more funding these initiatives, whereas in Europe it seems it's a lot of family money or large companies. It's also family money typically that fund a lot of these initiatives, and so it's a different model. And but the approach to innovation is really interesting too, where I get the sense that they're trying to look at like these big companies are looking at what American companies are doing and saying, okay, well, let's do that because we have to get into AI and so forth, and so that it's just a different model. Like I said, you don't see that much in the States.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah.
but this is completely true. And this was this kind of development over the last 2-3 years that I was talking about. Because, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe because of the lack of VCs, of investments, and so on, there are now more and more of those family-owned companies, large companies like Lidl, like BMW, the Quant family is behind it, and so on and so on, that like Schwarz family, which is behind Lidl, they founded this kind of Schwarz group and also connected it to a think tank. They are working very closely with Max Planck Institute, Fraunhofer Institute, so researcher institutes. And together, then they are trying to reach out and bring on board other companies, big companies like SAP and Siemens or Bosch, but also smaller companies. And then again, because of a lack of investments in the sphere of a company like Google and so on, they're at least saying, okay, if we are all putting our millions together, then maybe together we can reach still not the level of Google, but at least we are coming a little bit closer. And this actually, again, I think is a really good way forward. And the Applied AI initiative that you and I met is, I think, one of those really best practices that you can find right now in Europe.
Yeah.
So changing gears slightly, I think one of the major concerns in the US right now with respect to AI is not the direct risk of harm, but rather the impact of AI on future employment. And so, for example, in the US, we had this Hollywood writers' strike, really big deal over the summer. And one of the major issues that the writers were concerned about is being replaced by AI, having the studios just take their jobs and turn them over to AI. Does the AI Act address that issue at all?
No, not really. I think maybe the problem that is really beyond all of those concerns is, I think, similar to many transformations in our human history, basically, when the steam engine was coming, when other machines were coming, when electricity was coming, and so on. We always had huge transformation periods. And of course, in those periods, one of the famous examples is what happened in Manchester and in those areas of the UK, that then a lot of people are losing their jobs. But what history, in my opinion, showed us also that those jobs were not completely lost, but they were transformed into other areas. Of course, every time a big technology change is coming, we cannot be completely sure. So, for example, now with generative AI, indeed, many startups could lose their rightful existence because ChatGPT can do basically everything. Maybe also graphic designers and other jobs are becoming irrelevant. And then, at least in the next years, maybe it's not clear immediately where those people that were formerly doing those jobs could go to, because maybe there is not immediately a job opening or some necessity. The AI Act is not addressing this at all. Compared to the executive order, again, the AI Act is only focusing on product safety. So really making sure that those AI systems are, again, fulfilling those general principles that I was talking about. But I'm pretty sure the new European Commission that is being elected in this European election next year that I was talking about will identify this as one topic that it should become very active. And I wouldn't be surprised if we will see something employment AI related in the next 1-2 years also in the European Union. And again, even though I think that it's a typical transformation process, and in the end, most of the people will find a new job, at least for this transition period, yes, we probably need some support mechanism. We need to help people to relearn or reskill and to find a new purpose basically in their work life if they are really replaced by an AI system.
Well, that's the discussion's largely around what was it, like actors and whatnot. But is there a notion too, I think more broadly, of economic displacement for populations as AI kind of eats the world, so to speak? Or is that kind of a separate consideration that you'll maybe get to later?
So as I said, in the AI Act, this is not addressed at all. It will probably come in new legislation. Now that you are saying with the writers, the point again, the only thing where currently the AI Act is addressing this a little bit is that, well, at the moment, there is already an obligation to disclose if you are using a deep fake, at least to a certain extent. Until now, it's a bit unclear what happens in a movie, in a series, and so on and so on, if there is then still an obligation. And maybe this obligation is later also extended to all generated content by AI. This is one of the big discussions points right now. Which in the end could help, for example, a journalist, or could not help him if he or she wants to use ChatGPT in the future for writing the articles. But this is the only area where it's really debated with the realms of the AI Act. Otherwise, as I said, probably the next commission will do something about it.
How do we think about rogue states in this context? And so the US, we're going to have regulations. The EU is going to have regulations, but already in IT, we've had all kinds of rogue actors coming out of Russia, out of North Korea, trying to hack people's systems, committing fraud. I mean, it happens in other countries too, but certainly a lot of it comes out of rogue states. And so how do we internationally think about dealing with rogue states using AI against us? Is that something that an act like this would cover, or would that be more like some kind of a defense act?
It's a really good question. And actually, it's one thing that especially was coming from the US in the last month. So there was a lot of talk between the US government and the European Union, especially when it comes to foundation models and offering foundation models, very powerful foundation models via open source, because then, of course, every actor, every foreign state could download those systems. And for example, if one third country is not having a democratic system and doesn't have a problem to spy all the population and so on and so on, they could, of course, use those systems for those purposes. Well, in the end, what we could do in the AI Act, and even that is a little bit tricky, we could introduce some export bans. So, for example, that we are saying a system that can be used for social scoring, to go back to our prohibitions. If it's not allowed to develop it and to place it on the market within the European Union, it should also not be allowed to sell it to, for example, a state like Iran. We could also add something where we are, when it comes to those really powerful foundation models, restricting a little bit the use. But on the other hand, let's say the feedback from researchers, and this was one of the areas where I was still in a lot of contact with researchers, was that probably those means in a law will not be super effective. And you were saying it at the beginning, well, a law is nice as long as people want to follow a law and as long as the law is being enforced. But in the end, what do you do if there is a third country that is hostile against you and this country doesn't give anything about if there's an AI Act or not, or what is in the AI Act? So on those things, in my personal opinion, and I think it's shared by many people here in Brussels, only international cooperation is really effective. And we saw it a little bit now with the G7 plus AI Safety Summit in London at the beginning of November, where the UK government got a lot of criticism for inviting China. But on the other hand, without China, you do not achieve a lot on an international stage. So, and if the news currently are right, there seems to be an agreement which will be announced tomorrow, I read, between Biden and the Chinese government about a ban of automated decision making or automated weapon system, lethal weapon systems, which again would be a huge step forward. And I think only really has a chance if you have this high level context between governments and a kind of common agreement, at least between a lot of countries. And then if there are certain states that are still not playing by the games, then it would be the majority of those countries sanctioning those players that are not playing by the rules. I think this is kind of the best way forward.
So I guess for companies out there that are paying attention to the EU AI Act or might be impacted on it, are there any steps that you recommend they start taking now, or do they wait till it's done? Or what are your recommendations?
Yeah. So when it comes to the GDPR, our data protection regulation, I would say, well, my boss and I, we are known as critics of this law. So we do see certain points that are not good within the law. But one of the criticism I think that companies need to face is that, especially in Europe, many companies were kind of completely shocked when the GDPR became applicable in 2018. 1 or 2 months before, May 2018, the day where it became applicable, they were waking up and were saying, oh God, what do I do now? In 2 months, it's impossible, and so on and so on. Truth is that there were also a lot of other problems. Guidelines were not there, different interpretations between member states, and so on and so on. But those things companies cannot really change. And probably, at least to a certain extent, it will reoccur now also with the AI Act. But what companies can do already is wake up early and engage early. So they can already now, even now in the negotiations, they already know a little bit the direction or can foresee the direction where the AI Act is going. So they can already quite certainly say, in, for example, transparency obligations. My instruction to use in the future needs to look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This they can prepare. They can also reach out to enforcement bodies to, for example, also the European Commission, and really enter in a kind of regulatory dialogue, because Commission and also the national competent authorities, they often lack the experience and the expertise when it comes to machine learning, deep learning, and especially foundation models. No one in Germany, in the German state, is an expert on foundation models. No one. And if I would be an expert, I would never go there, because I do not earn any money there compared to Google, or maybe they would at least need to offer me something very, very competitive. Meaning that the state, I think, is much more than with other laws, really, really depending on quality input. And this empowers companies, gives them a good chance to indicate that there are certain problems, that maybe there are struggles that both sides are facing, and so on and so on. And maybe they can also share best practices. And I think if companies are doing this over the next 2 years until the AI Act is becoming applicable, if we manage now the adoption in this year or in the next year, I think this would help basically the whole ecosystem, but especially companies, because they would be prepared once the AI becomes applicable. And this not only applies to European companies, but also all US companies that want to become active or that are active in the European internal market. Reach out early, go in a direct dialogue with enforcers, with national competent authorities, and also, maybe as the last point, be active in international standardization organizations, because the AI Act is heavily depending on harmonized technical standards. And if your company has a lot to contribute to that, a lot of important points to share, use it, because then maybe you can, in the end, or you are able to really shape a standard, which is, of course, good for this particular company.
Awesome. Cool. I know it's getting a bit late over there. I think you answered most of our questions. Is there any kind of final questions, Matt, or any final points, Kai, you want to address before you go off to hopefully get this thing wrapped up before Christmas starts? Oh, sorry.
I wasn't even holding my microphone. There we go. I have one more question I wanted to ask. And so that is, to what extent will the AI Act use to enforce actions against individuals versus companies? And so in the US, we saw this with the war on drugs, right? So drugs are harmful, therefore we need to combat their sale. And in practice, this sent a lot of individuals to prison, not a lot of like larger organizations that were behaving badly. And so my question here is that, given that a lot of this technology can be run on a laptop by an individual, is the intention mostly to enforce against corporations, or will these laws be used against individual bad actors as well?
Yeah. Very timely question also, because so far the AI Act was basically just targeting, if I can call it like this, companies, or at least developers, also universities and so on. So basically most of the obligations within the AI Act are going to the deployer, which is the company that is placing the AI system on the market or putting it into service. And then a limited number of obligations needs to be fulfilled by the deployer or user of this AI system. So far, individuals or the end user or affected person, or however you call them, they are basically only covered by the AI Act in a way to enable them or to give them certain rights. For instance, now the affected person by a high-risk AI system has the right to ask for an explanation why a certain decision has been taken. You can see there a little bit also in the GDPR some not overlaps, but certain very similar provisions where the individual is granted certain rights to also issue a complaint if, for example, one enforcement body is not going against a company, is ignoring a regular violation of fundamental rights and so on. The Commission had a kind of last minute initiative. They wanted to put the individual kind of in the scope. And if an individual is using a deep fake, this individual could face a fine of 15,000 euros. We in the European Parliament, however, completely rejected it because for us it's more criminal law. And again, the AI Act is product safety legislation. It's all about making those products safe. And even though cross-party alignment, we all see a huge risk when it comes to deep fakes and fake news and other things. We do not really think that this should be put in the AI Act because it would further complicate the law and again would also mess up or mix up in a very bad way product safety, criminal law, and other things. And yeah, this is hopefully why we are in the end succeeding to keep it away. But yeah, there is some talk of putting the individual in.
That's interesting. No, that makes a whole lot of sense. And so maybe the AI Act can become a model for the criminal law where criminal penalties are appropriate. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense to kind of take incremental steps and then let other bodies figure out those pieces over time.
Yeah, exactly. So in the AI Act, if it's staying like it is now, there would be basically just a few references what a deep fake is. If we are now sticking to this example, then it would be on the provider to build the system with a kind of mechanism that allows later when the system is being used to disclose that it's, for example, a deep fake. And then the deployer that is using the AI system, again, would need to fulfill certain, I don't know, for example, labeling obligation or other ways of disclosing it. But then the question, as you are rightly saying, if then the system, because the user deployer in the AI Act is more a company that is using it, but not the end user that is using the system. It's a bit complicated. And this third level, I think there, as you said, should be better covered by an additional law or just via adjustments of our criminal laws that are already existing.
Interesting. Yeah, great discussion today. I don't know. What do you think, Joe? Any other questions before we close out?
No, I think it's see if this thing gets over the line now. So
yeah, maybe we'll have to have a follow-up and we can discuss any final changes maybe in 6
yeah,
months.
either a celebration party or a condolences party, one of the two. So
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, but you do bring up some interesting timing concerns, though, right? Because if the election's coming up, this thing isn't passed soon. Who knows? And especially at the rate everything is changing right now.
Yeah.
I mean, would this act even be relevant? Hopefully, I guess that would be a test. You know, if you have to come back to this in 2025, I guess.
Yeah.
Watch, it just becomes like the eternal thing that keeps getting punted every 2 years. So, but let's hope it gets passed. So,
yeah, let's see.
Yeah. So, awesome. For people who want to learn more about you and the EU AI Act, how can they do that?
Basically, I'm rather active on LinkedIn or on Twitter or have an own blog, and there they will find everything. Basically, I'm kind of offering there regularly some updates where we are with the AI Act and so on. And yeah, so there's, I think, the best place to have a look.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, yeah, thanks for your time. It's good to chat with you again. Hopefully we'll maybe do a recap after this thing's all squared away. So
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for the time, Kai. It's great to see you. So, all right, we'll see you all next week. So thank you. All right.